Well, for yet another time, NASCAR, you've done it again. Welcome everybody here to NASCAR Talk, where your host, myself, the one and only Seth Cole here behind the 1620 WCBM Studios microphone, I'm going to tell you like it is, and you're going to like it. Most you can do is yell at me in the comment section that I'm wrong, in which case, that's your prerogative. Doesn't mean that I'm right. It's merely my opinion on here, but it's my talk show, and so therefore I'm going to give my opinion on it. But that's what's great about the sports world. Everybody has an opinion, and not necessarily is everybody correct. But I think there's one point that we can all agree on, and it's something that went down in today's Xfinity race, which was supposed to be run last night. It was run today, which they end up bringing up a point that it was almost a 24-hour race. Very interesting. Anyway, the Xfinity race, the Coca-Cola Firecracker 300, finishing up not too long ago at Daytona International Speedway. Race was actually pretty good overall. NASCAR making some good protocol decisions as far as weather is concerned, with lightning strikes in the area and everything, bring the cars to pit road. Yeah, they ended up getting hit with a rainstorm afterwards, so it was a good proactive move on their part and everything. But oh boy, it's time to really address it. Oh man, this part of the show brought to you by Johnny Cash, I Walk the Line. Let's hope they get rid of it. Oh boy. Okay, anyway, so basically, if you guys don't know what this is about already, you may have already made an educated guess. Yes, the overtime line. Why is it in NASCAR? Okay, now, there are certain tracks I can see the overtime line being a legitimate thing. But here's the problem, okay? The overtime line does not serve the purpose I think NASCAR was intending it to do. Because let's go back and look at the old format, okay? Let's look at the old format of where they either race it back to the white and the yellow flag, that ends the race, or they race it back to the checkered flag, that ends the race. Let's take a big track and then we'll actually compare with a smaller track later on. Let's compare first with today's race at Daytona. Okay, first off, their overtime line did not do what they actually intended for it to do, because the overtime line was not hit by the leader before the wreck started on the back straightaway. You can clearly see that William Byron was maybe about a good 10, 12 feet before the overtime line by the time Garrett Smithley's zero car was facing 90 degrees the wrong direction. NASCAR waited I counted it, an entire 4 to 5 seconds after that zero car was sideways before throwing the yellow. Before they threw the caution flag. Now, should they have thrown the caution flag? Absolutely. It wasn't the last lap. If it had been the white flag lap, then probably I would have said, no, don't throw the caution, let them race it out. Because, they can get slowed down before they get to the back straightaway. All the wrecked cars were over down at the latter portion of the back straightaway, so it wouldn't have been much of a problem for, safety vehicles to get them and everything. But since it was 2 to go, they hadn't yet reached the white flag, okay, yes, by all means, throw the caution flag. That made sense. Throw the caution flag, actually let them race back to the line, and end the race with the white flag and the yellow flag at the same time. But the fact that NASCAR waited so doggone long to throw that yellow flag is the big problem. They showed a camera angle which made NASCAR look stupid. They showed, I guess it was that bat cam that NBC is using. They showed the caution light. They showed the overtime line. And they went frame by frame. And going by that frame by frame is a sideways zero car sliding across the overtime line. That light was still off. The caution light still was off. It wasn't on. Why? Why do you wait that long to throw a yellow flag when there is clearly a car that is not facing the direction it should be? It is literally blocking the top 2 grooves of the racetrack. Why do you not throw a caution for that? Why do you not throw it immediately? Why do you wait 5 full seconds after that car is out of shape before you're like, oh yeah, well, we'll throw the yellow. Because the leader's across the overtime line, we'll throw the yellow. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have a problem with William Byron running. I'm a fan of William Byron. I'm a fan of him winning that race. I don't have a problem with that. William Byron did nothing wrong. He ran the race. The whole fault is on NASCAR. It just doesn't make sense to me. It made them look like, like idiots. You see a car sideways and you wait 5 doggone seconds before you throw the yellow flag. You have NBC showing footage of the replay, showing the overtime line, showing the caution light, showing a car spinning across the overtime line, and the caution light is still off. All right, so let's look at this whole thing of the overtime line. Is it absolutely necessary in NASCAR? I don't think so. I'm one of the people that agrees with a lot of people out there say, get rid of the overtime line. It's not necessary. We don't need it. All right, let's go start with the big track like I said we were going to do. Let's say the overtime line is gone. Overtime line doesn't exist anymore. All right? All right, so let's go with the green, white, checkered. What do we do? Well, okay, NASCAR, let me give you a couple of lessons. First off, take today's scenario. We hadn't yet gotten back to the white flag. The wreck takes place in the back straightaway. All right, then you throw the caution flag. That's fine. Let them race back to the start-finish line. They start slowing down their pace. By the time they get to the back straightaway, all right, that's it. We call the caution. That's it. Race is going to end under yellow flag conditions. Okay. That's not a problem. Let's say the wreck took place on the front straightaway. All right. We got a caution that comes out. We freeze the field. Freeze the field in the back straightaway. Immediately when the caution comes out, you freeze the field. Not so hard. That way, they don't race it back to the start-finish line. We're all okay. They can use the back straightaway to start slowing down. You know, it shouldn't be so hard. It really shouldn't be so difficult. It shouldn't be so technical. It shouldn't be so complicated, and yet NASCAR makes it a complication. All right, let's go to a short track. Let's say we go to Bristol. All right, let's say we have a green, white, checkered there. Wreck on the front straightaway. All right, throw the caution, frozen field. Wreck on the back straightaway, let them race it out. More than likely, by the time the wreck finishes up in the back straightaway, cars are either going to be down on the bottom of the racetrack out of the way, or they're going to have left the scene of the accident. Now, this is only if it's a white flag lap. If it's not yet the white flag lap, it's like 2 to go, racing back to the white, finish the race under caution with the yellow and the white flag. I mean, what is so wrong with a frozen field caution? They use when the caution they had that whole thing when the caution comes out, they go to the scoring loop. Okay, so use that to figure out the scoring when you have a frozen field caution. The overtime line, they try and use it, I guess, as a counter to a frozen field, and it doesn't work. It does not work. The other thing is, with that overtime line, the fact of the matter is, more often than not, the wrecks that take place are going to take place past that overtime line. I don't know who it was that strategically decided to put the overtime lines in certain places on the racetrack, but you look at where they put them and they say, here's the overtime line. If they get past this, then the race is going to end. And you think to yourself, you do realize where that line is positioned. If they do wreck, the race is going to end under caution. There's not going to be any really scenario very often where there's going to be a case where they're going to wreck before that and not wreck after that. They probably should have put the overtime line over in somewhere around turns 3 and 4, because that's where a lot of the moves get made, heading down the back straightaway of a track into 3 and 4. 1 and 2, they're going to, for the most part, kind of mind their manners because they want to make it to 3 and 4 to have a shot for the win. But, and I'm throwing out, scenarios here that NASCAR could, maybe, quotes, use, and maybe they aren't exactly the best. But they're an improvement over what they got right now. The biggest issue that's going on right now as far as the overtime line, especially today, okay, we can make arguments about the overtime line. Is it necessary? Is it unnecessary? Should it be there? Shouldn't it be there? That's either here nor there as far as what I'm wanting to talk about here. And the fact that it matters is what we're talking about right here is the fact that that overtime line was not hit by the race leader. There was a wreck behind them, and NASCAR waited until the leader got past the overtime line before they decided to throw the yellow flag. That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. That long 5-second delay after a wreck had already happened. I mean, from what I understand, NASCAR says if a caution comes out, the race is over. The field is frozen. So, regardless of the fact of whether or not William Byron had crossed that overtime line or not, the fact is the caution should have come out. The caution should have come out at that time, not waiting 5 seconds later. So that's my bit of a rant here as far as that's concerned. Is the overtime line necessary? Is the overtime line not necessary? Some tracks, maybe. There are some tracks, maybe. I don't think you necessarily need it for a big track like a super speedway, though. Talladega, Daytona, I really don't think you need it. They call them self-cleaning racetracks. And, if necessary, throw a caution flag and, if you're going to end the race under caution, okay. Don't need to determine it by by an overtime line. Just determine it by, how severe the wreck is and whether or not it's safe for the drivers to be able to race back through. You don't need an overtime line to be able to tell you that. But, as far as I've seen so far, since they've put the overtime line in place either. The overtime line hasn't added anything. It's not added any suspense. It's not added any intrigue. It's not added anything special to add to the betterment of NASCAR, to the excitement of NASCAR. It's there. It's done nothing in any way. And now today, I can't say all the blame is on the overtime line being there, but partially the blame is on the overtime line being there. The biggest thing is on NASCAR deciding when to throw that yellow flag. The timing on it was absolutely ridiculous. Big tracks, though, Daytona, Talladega, I don't think necessarily an overtime line is absolutely crucial. Bristol, okay. Richmond, possibly. Dover, all right. Martinsville, yeah. These places I can see an overtime line being necessary, so that way they're able to get cars slowed down. You know, we know how short the tracks are and how easily it is for the leaders to be able to come up onto a wreck that may have happened mid-pack or at the rear of the field. You know, that is understandable. But a big racetrack, Daytona, I mean, you can maybe even throw in, you know, the mile-and-a-half Auto Club, probably not. Las Vegas, probably don't need one. Probably Charlotte, you don't need an overtime line. Pocono, I very much doubt you need an overtime line for Pocono. The road courses, I don't know, do the road courses have overtime lines? If they do, I don't understand why. Infineon definitely does not need one, or Sonoma, whatever you want to call it. Watkins Glen doesn't need one. I think there's a couple of tracks on the schedule that maybe, yeah, you could use the overtime line, but not every single doggone track on the circuit needs to have the overtime line. There's some that are so big enough that you can determine by yourself whether or not a race is good enough to be able to continue on or not, whether you need to end it under the yellow flag or not. You don't need a stupid line on the back straightaway to tell you that. I mean, and the thing of it is, too, I mean, you know, the overtime line is supposed to determine whether or not we're going to have another green-white checkered or something. You know what? Get rid of that idea. Either decide, all right, we're going to have, you know, attempts at a green-white checkered, multiple attempts at a green-white checkered, or we're just going to have one attempt at a green-white checkered. You don't need a line. You don't need a line to be able to determine that. Because, like I said, more often than not, that overtime line, all it's done is to serve a purpose, is basically already decide for us, okay, we're not going to be having multiple attempts at a green-white checkered, because 99.9% of the time that we, with the exception of today, and yet NASCAR blew it on their call of when to bring out the yellow, 99.9% of the times when they say that overtime line is going to come into play into deciding whether or not we're going to have another attempt at green-white checkered or not, the drivers usually make it past that overtime line without bringing out a wreck. So we're like, oh, we're past the overtime line? All right, this is our only attempt at green-white checkered. It's almost, you know, expected it's going to be our only attempt. So all that really does, that overtime line, all it has really accomplished ever since it's been implemented in NASCAR is basically determined for us, okay, we've now gotten to overtime, that overtime line exists, and so therefore with the existence of that overtime line, we are not going to have multiple attempts at a green-white checkered. We have a 99.9% chance that this is going to be the only green-white checkered we're going to get. If we get a caution, the race is going to end under caution, and whoever's out in front is going to win the race. We're not going to be into multiple overtimes. Just one overtime, that's all we're going to get. So yeah, that's basically my opinion on the overtime line. I'd love to know what your guys' opinion is. Should NASCAR keep the overtime line? Should they get rid of the overtime line? Should they bring back the multiple attempts at green-white checkered? Or should they just basically, since they've got the overtime line there, should they just have one attempt at a green-white checkered? Just get it over with there. You don't need a line. Just have it be one attempt at a green-white checkered. That's it. That's done. Whenever we have the caution come out, that's when we freeze the field. We find out who's in the front. Don't need a line to tell us that. The line was there. It's basically just determined that. So why don't we just get rid of the line and just have it be one attempt at a green-white checkered? Should we maybe have the green-white, or have the overtime line implemented at certain tracks, maybe that are smaller, like Bristol, Dover, Richmond, and not have it at the bigger racetracks where it'd be pretty easy to be able to determine, oh wow, that's a big wreck. We're not going to be able to have the drivers go past that since we still have another lap we got to go around. Let's throw the caution flag. Or we're on the white flag lap, there's a wreck on the back straightaway, well, we can let them race back to the start-finish line. We don't need to throw a caution for that. Another thing that I don't understand as well, and I'll quickly end this off here, is especially with the super speedways, when we have wrecks in the back straightaway, NASCAR throws caution flags. Now, they're saying that the reason is because, well, we need to let the safety crews be able to get out there to the drivers. Well, if the field is over on the front straightaway, I mean, they're not going to be interfering with those cars that are, those emergency vehicles that are trying to get out there. And by the time they get around turn 2 to the back straightaway again, they're going to be coasting. The fact of the matter is, you look at today. Let's go to today. We had the wreck take place with 2 to go. All right? Took place with 2 to go. It was on the 2 to go lap before coming to the white flag that the wreck took place in the back straightaway. There were 2 or 3 cars that were sitting there on the bottom of the racetrack. There were safety vehicles there. What happened? The pace car led the field under pacing through all that mess, past all the safety vehicles. Led them right through all the emergency vehicles. Who's to say that the wreck takes place, we let them race back to the start-finish line, they're not going to get slowed down to pacing and just pace their way through that where all the emergency vehicles are. We did it behind the pace car. Why can't we do it? Why can't they do it themselves? Pace car would more than likely have picked them up by the time they exited turn number 2 anyway. After they raced back to the start-finish line, they'd have gotten slowed down, coasted down to the pace speed with the pace car picking them out at turn 2, and they'd have been able to pace through the wreckage, through the emergency vehicles, through the wrecked cars, down the back straightaway. Wouldn't have made any difference. Talladega, maybe a little bit different because the start-finish line is put down between the middle of the tri-oval and turn 1. That may take them a little bit more time to get slowed down, although I think it's actually a little bit longer around turns 1 and 2 at Talladega than it is actually around turns 1 and 2 at Daytona. So they could use that difference of length to be able to get themselves slowed down by the time they got to turn 2 in the back straightaway. If there's a wreck on the front straightaway, okay, not a problem. Not a problem at all to, say, okay, we're not letting them race back to the start-finish line. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to, agree to drivers going over 200 miles per hour full speed when there's wrecked race cars all over the place and emergency vehicles and emergency workers trying to get out to those race cars. But when they're over on an entirely different half of the racetrack, I don't have a problem with the leaders racing it back to the start-finish line, especially when they've got ample time to be able to slow down afterwards before getting over to where the wreck took place over on the back straightaway. So, there's a lot of things that NASCAR's not doing correctly. And, again, today, big time blown call. Should they have thrown the yellow? Absolutely they should have thrown the yellow flag. I don't have a problem with that. It's the fact that they waited 5 seconds after a car was out of shape, actually slid across the overtime line. They're putting all this emphasis on the overtime line. Let them get to the overtime line. It was sliding across the overtime line, and then they decided to throw a caution 3 seconds after that car slid across the overtime line. It was a full 2 to 3 seconds before that car was out of shape. Anyway, that's basically all I got here for this episode of NASCAR Talk. My little rant is over here. Overtime line isn't necessary or not. Certain places I think it is, certain places I don't think it is. Anyway, give me your opinion in the comments what you think of the overtime line. And let me know what you thought about the fact that it took them 5 seconds to throw a yellow flag with a wreck taking place on the back straightaway at Daytona. Absolutely ridiculous, I think, on the part of NASCAR. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anything that comes up that's controversial, next I'll probably be having an episode here of NASCAR Talk, but till then, this has been Seth Cole signing off from the 1620 WCBM Studios Network, and until next time, I will see you later.